I don't talk about anything Christie related.
And joining me now is Republican presidential candidate and former New Jersey Governor Christie. Welcome, Governor. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Well, so let me ask you first about Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
Because how rare is it, you're a former prosecutor, for a plea deal like this to fall apart?
It's rare. It definitely is in my experience, and I ran the 5th largest office in the country for 7 years, and it is rare for this to happen. But I will tell you that I was talking to members of my team in the last couple of weeks and said, I just don't believe the judge is going to approve this plea deal in the way it's been laid out for a few reasons. One, because you get 2 misdemeanor tax counts after a 5-year investigation. Secondly, you dismiss a gun charge that has a 10-year mandatory minimum. And 3, you say the investigation is still ongoing. Like, how do you square those things? Usually when someone pleads, it's over. And the plea wraps up all parts of any investigation that you have into that particular person. So from the beginning, I was concerned about the way they investigated this case. Were they being transparent about what else they were looking at? Was U.S. Attorney Weiss being candid about the authority he had? Because now it looks like he didn't have the authority, right? I mean, if in fact the investigation is still ongoing, it's the same guy who said that he was agreeing to the plea deal, U.S. Attorney Weiss, also saying, well, no, it's not all done? Or did someone above him tell him it wasn't all done?
But that was in his press release. That was his press release that said that the investigation is ongoing.
Right, and so my point, though, is, Andrea, to say that and to also agree to a deal, was he signaling that he wasn't happy about this and that it was being imposed upon him? Because to put that in, the 2 things were contradictory in my experience. It's not that it never, ever happens, but it is so rare. It's certainly not on a high-profile case like this. And so I think it justifies the judge looking at this and saying, I'm not approving this. You guys either have to resolve your issues or not. But we're not going to play this kind of game. And so this puts Hunter Biden and his lawyers in a really bad spot. And if I were Hunter Biden, I'd be looking at my lawyers saying, what the heck are you guys doing here?
And is the Republican, the Republican House members, are they correct to now say that we want to connect this and any further investigation to the President of the United States on a completely unsubstantiated charge that he was involved with his son's dealings before he became president?
Well, look, there are obviously allegations out there from whistleblowers that are concerning. They are. I mean, if they're telling the truth.
The IRS whistleblowers?
Right. If they're telling the truth, then it undercuts what U.S. Attorney Weiss has said about his authority. It undercuts some of the stuff that they're walking away from here in not making Hunter Biden take a plea to any of the foreign activity. So, look, I think what I've found in these investigations, especially the complex political ones, is that you never know where it's going to lead. And so I think it's appropriate for a U.S. attorney to say, if you want a plea deal, you got to tell me everything, Hunter, that you were involved in and who was involved with you. Otherwise, we'll indict you and you go to trial and take your chances. That's the way I would be doing this. And if he's got information that involves anyone connected with this that may have done something wrong, up to and including his father, he's got to be clean about that. And I don't know that he has or hasn't, but it doesn't sound like he has.
But what about the argument that other people who haven't paid their taxes but do pay back taxes, penalty, and interest, whose name is not Biden, don't get indicted, don't get criminally prosecuted?
Except that's not the only part of the investigation, even in what they said. He also lied on a federal gun permit. And his father was the sponsor of that bill, Andrea, to make it a 10-year mandatory minimum to lie on a permit. It is hard for me when I've heard Democrats say over and over again, we need more gun laws. Well, you can have that argument, but you better enforce the ones you have. And so I'm not necessarily objecting to the way they resolve the tax case. My concern is, how did it take you 5 years to get there? Concern one, because it's not a complicated tax scheme. It's money that he got in pretty directly that he didn't pay taxes on. Doesn't take you 5 years to figure out. We're not talking about a complicated tax scheme where people are trying to avoid taxes in a way that gets them in trouble for tax evasion. But secondly, the gun charge, if you dismiss that gun charge, what are you getting in return for that as the government? I wouldn't just give that away if I were the prosecutor.
Well, they were deferring and they were still going to be sentencing.
Right, but with deferring on this, Andrea, in my experience, is dismissing. Because unless the guy gets himself in trouble again with federal law enforcement, it's going to go away. And so it is a dismissal. And you're not getting anything that I could tell in return for that. And it is an open and shut case there. It's not like there's any question. He clearly had a drug problem at the time, and he mishandled the gun afterwards, and there's video evidence of that. So you can trade that away if you want, but you better get something in return. And I think what the judge is looking at probably here is she's saying, well, wait a second. If you're doing this and you're still investigating other things that may wind up coming back to Hunter Biden or start with Hunter Biden and go other places, how am I supposed to approve this plea deal? And I think it reeks, Andrea, of confusion, and they shouldn't be confused here. This is pretty straightforward, and if they are, that may mean that there are different people making different decisions, and that's opposite of what the Attorney General has told us. So people better get their story straight, and I think that's what this judge is saying.
Well, let me move on to Donald Trump. Mark Meadows, you point out, as we just pointed out, is not commenting. To your knowledge, you were still involved in the campaign up through election night, really, and then into December. Did he encourage the president's extensive efforts to not concede and begin the process of trying to
I don't know the answer to that question.
overturn the election?
I don't know the question of the answer, because really, after I denounced Donald Trump on ABC on election night,
We all saw that.
right, and after I did that, I was not involved in any of those meetings anymore. So I don't have any firsthand knowledge to that. But what I will say in watching that video is that looks to me like somebody who's cooperating with the federal government. Witnesses, grand jury is secretive for the government. The government cannot reveal things.
Not for the witnesses.
But not for the witness. The witness is told as they leave, you don't have to answer any questions or talk about it, but you are free to do so if you like. The only time you can't do it is when the government has a cooperation agreement with you and they say, no talking about this. The only time we want to hear you talking is when you're on the witness stand. And that, to me, Mark Meadows looks to me like a federal witness under a cooperation agreement, and my guess is that's what we're going to find out he is.
You've said that when he refused to concede on election night, that was what crossed the line. What took you so long? There were plenty of examples of him suggesting prior to election day that the election was going to be a fraud, that he didn't believe it. He sowed doubts with people. Why did it take you so long to part ways?
Look, I think that I always viewed that as part of him trying to encourage his voters and push his voters to come out in even greater numbers, because he was trying to say, well, they're going to play games with it, because we did have a very unusual election in 2020 with the absentee ballot issue being much bigger than it normally was. The difference for me, Andrea, was when you stand behind the seal of the President of the United States in the East Room of the White House on election night as president, and you say this election was stolen, when you have absolutely no evidence to support that it was, the American people are sitting there and thinking, well, he's president. He must know something we don't know. It lends credence to it that it did not deserve or merit. And I think that was so beneath the office. It was because the politics were over. The votes were in. So it's not playing a political game anymore, which we see lots of people do different things politically over our lifetimes. This is now, you're the President of the United States in the White House, in your official role, and you tell people it was stolen, and it wasn't, and it undercuts their confidence in the election. And to me, that was the thing that was so unacceptable, so beneath the office that he was honored to hold, that I could no longer be supportive of him.
And you called him in December of 2020 to part ways. And did you tell him, you lost? And what did he say to you?
Well, the intent of the call was not to part ways. He had called me, actually, because he was upset about something I had said on ABC that Sunday. And we got into the conversation, and I said to him, look, I've known you for a long time. What you need to do here is to concede the election to Joe Biden, invite him to the White House, shake his hand, let the transition move forward, go to his inauguration, and then go back to Mar-a-Lago. And I said to him, look, I think Biden is not going to do well. And when he doesn't do well, if you do all this, you have a chance to run again if you want to. I said, but if you don't do this stuff, your career is over because no one will be able to trust you again for anything.
And what did he say to you?
I will never, ever, ever do that. So what else you got, Chris?
So he said he would never concede.
Correct.
Did he say that he knew he had lost?
He did not say that to me in that phone call. But what I will say to Andrea is that I know he was concerned about losing. When we were doing debate prep through the late summer and early fall of 2020, there were any number of times that he expressed that he was worried about the shape that the race was in, particularly in the context of the debate. He said, look, we got to work hard on this because I got to do well in this first debate. We need to catch up. So there was no question in my mind that he knew he was behind and he was concerned about it, but we didn't have any conversation post-election about that.
Rudy Giuliani is now admitting in court that he made false statements about two Georgia women, two election workers, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman. And that, of course, they were demeaned, vilified by Donald Trump, the followers, and it really changed their lives. Let's play what they said to the January 6th committee.
I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people, starting with number 45 and his ally, Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter, Shay, to push their own lies about how the presidential election was stolen.
I just don't do nothing anymore. I don't want to go anywhere. I second guess everything that I do. It's affecting my life in a major way.
As a former prosecutor and a former governor, what was your reaction when you heard the audio of Donald Trump telling Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, just find me 11,780 votes?
I thought it was awful. I thought it was beneath the office that he was honored to hold. And I thought that he was getting himself deeper and deeper into potential trouble. And it was because his own ego couldn't bear the idea that he had lost to Joe Biden. And he was going to do anything he could to convince himself first, and then anybody else that he could, that in fact he hadn't lost. But all the evidence was otherwise. And when I heard it, I have to tell you the truth, I didn't at first think about it from a criminal perspective. I thought about it from a public perspective, in that it was, again, another awful moment that he was subjecting the American public to because of his own ego. And that's just not the kind of person we need behind the desk in the Oval Office, in my view. And that's why I think it's one of the issues that disqualifies him.
Donald Trump is attacking you on social media for shaking hands with Barack Obama during the recovery from Superstorm Sandy. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we actually have responded to that as a campaign already, Andrea. I have said many times that I do not regret for 1 minute that handshake or the visit the president made that day, because my state had sustained the worst natural disaster in its history and the second worst in American history behind Katrina. And the president came that day in the midst of the last 7 days of a re-election campaign to come and see the damage for himself and to console the people of my state and to assure them that he was going to be there to help provide the funds that were necessary to rebuild and for our state to recover. That's what a responsible elected official does. And I'm confident Donald Trump doesn't understand that, because all he would have been concerned about was that picture. I don't give a damn about that picture. I didn't vote for Barack Obama in 2008 or 2012. I didn't support a great deal of his policies, but you have one president at a time. And he was good enough to come that day to support our state and to help us begin the rebuilding. And I don't regret for 1 minute welcoming him to my state. But what we did today was to send out a picture from Donald Trump's wedding in 2005 to Melania, where he's standing next to Hillary Clinton, who he invited to the wedding. So I'll say this to you, Donald. I invited Barack Obama to come and help my state after the worst natural disaster. I didn't invite Hillary Clinton to my wedding or Barack Obama to my wedding, and you did. So I don't know who was starstruck more, me or you. But given that you had donated $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation and repeatedly donated to Hillary Clinton's campaigns, it seems to me that your greed was driving that. So you want to keep sending those pictures out? It's fine by me. We're more than happy to respond with pictures of you, not serving your people, but serving yourself like you always do.
That seems like a preview of a debate stage, except he's not going to show up, most likely.
Oh, he'll be there.
You think?
Oh, yes.
Back in 2020, there was a briefing at the White House for the president about election security. Chris Krebs and others telling him that the voting machines were great. And apparently, according to reporting, he was ready to brag about that and have a news conference. So was he at one point pretty confident that the election could be done with mail-in ballots?
I have to say the truth. From the time I started debate prep with him, which was in the late summer of 2020, he was expressing concerns about mail-in ballots right from that moment. And in fact, Andrea, folks like myself and Bill Seppi and his campaign manager were urging him to stop because so many of, we thought, his potential voters were seniors who would be really concerned about going to a polling place during COVID and might not vote if they thought that mail-in ballots weren't secure, that we were urging him to stop saying that stuff because we didn't think it was in his political interest to say so. But I do remember from the beginning, I don't remember hearing about him being proud of the security of the election. I have no reason to doubt the reporting, but he never said that directly to me.
Let me ask you some quick campaign questions.
Sure.
In that recent Monmouth poll, not only did 69% of Republicans say that Donald Trump was the best candidate in the general election against Joe Biden, but 55% didn't want you. How do you run with that? Isn't your message, your anti-Trump message, really jeopardizing, sabotaging your campaign?
No, because it's the truth. And by the way, I'm not surprised to see that. When in the initial stages of a campaign, you go after the person who is the incumbent president and is the front runner, of course, the people who are inclined to vote for him at the moment are going to think unfavorably of you. But that's why campaigns matter, Andrea. And arguments can get changed. And we've seen campaigns change significantly. I believe as we continue to make this argument and more evidence comes forward, which it will, over the course of time about Donald Trump's conduct. And when I examine and let people examine his failures as president. He didn't build the wall. He said he was going to build 52 miles of new wall in 4 years. If he continues at that pace, if he got reelected, he'd only need 110 more years as president to build the whole wall. So we're going to continue to make that argument because it's the truth, it's what people deserve, and it's the right one. And I'm not worried about polls in July, because if we had polls in July in 15, which we did, that mattered, Jeb Bush and Scott Walker were going to be the Republican nominees for president.
Would you take the Mitt Romney pledge and get out after February 26th if you saw no chance of winning and thought it would elect him?
I don't, look, when I didn't see any chance of winning 8 years ago after the New Hampshire primary, I got out right away. So I'm not going to take any, look, people are asking us to take enough pledges already, Andrea. I like Mitt Romney. He's a friend of mine. I don't disagree with what he said in his column. But I think that takes care of itself naturally, politically, when you can't raise money anymore and you see you're not getting votes. If that happens, then I have no reason to continue to stay in a race, nor do I think most other people would.
What happens if he's the nominee? What do you do?
Well, I don't think he'll win. I don't think he can win. Against President Biden. He's already proven that he's lost to President Biden. I've already answered this question like a dozen times, Andrea.
You could change your mind.
No, I haven't changed my mind. And look, at the end of the day, I've made my position on Donald Trump's performance and his prospects clearer than any Republican candidate in this race by a factor of 100.
Let me ask you about some issues. You said that you believe that states should have a right on abortion. Well, there's been horrifying testimony in Texas recently from women who, have carried unviable fetuses, have jeopardized their own life, their ability to conceive in another pregnancy. Why give states like Texas the right to put such stringent bans on abortion if you ultimately believe that a federal ban should be some 20 weeks?
Because, first of all, I haven't taken a position on a federal ban at all because I don't think it's appropriate. Look, the reason why is because that's what the Constitution requires. The Constitution is silent as to the issue of abortion. That's why I thought Roe was wrongly decided 50 years ago.
And Dobbs was correct.
And now each state's going to do it. They're going to decide for themselves, the citizens of those states and their legislatures and their governor, depending on how they decide to do it. And Andrea, there's a lot of difference in our country on this issue. So you look at Oklahoma, they're banning it entirely unless the life of the mother is involved. My home state of New Jersey, you can have an abortion up to 9 months. 9 months. So what I would like to see is for the Constitution to work. Let every state make their judgment. The people of those states make the judgment. And then let's see if there's a national consensus at 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever it might be. Then and only then should the federal government consider getting in the middle of this. They should not, and they don't have the constitutional authority to supersede the states. And look, you've covered everything in this business that can be covered. You know, there's not 60 votes in the United States Senate for anything. And so the only way there ever will be is if we come to a national consensus that's formed by the states. If they do, that's something I'm willing to consider. But until then, I want the Constitution to work.
Governor Christie, I still want to hear you on the subject of the Trump indictment when it comes down, when and if.
You invite me back and I'll come and give you my opinion.
Come back.
Thank you.
We'll leave that there for now, but let's go back to the breaking news, of course. In Wilmington, Delaware, where Hunter Biden has been in court. Back with us, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli outside the courthouse. NBC's Garrett Haake, former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, Brendan Buck, a former top aide to both speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, and joining us now, Catherine Christian, a former assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's office. So, first of all, Mike Memoli, give us any updates from the courtroom. Are they still arguing over how to proceed?
So, Andrea, the latest indication we've just gotten in the last few minutes is that this proceeding has resumed and that it does appear they are trying to get back on the track that this day began with an agreement about a plea deal related to those tax charges in which Hunter Biden pleads guilty to those 2 misdemeanors in return for an agreement for probation and not jail time. And that separately, this gun charge will lead to a pretrial diversion program in which Hunter Biden agrees to undergo counseling, potentially go through some testing as part of that agreement as well, and then ultimately that charge could be thrown out. It appears, based on the conversation that's been happening back and forth in the courtroom, that they are back somewhat on the same page here. What we don't have a resolution of, and ultimately which could affect whether this does move forward to completion, is what the potential of an ongoing investigation might mean for this. It does appear that the parties have agreed to narrow the scope of charging based on these specific cases in a specific timeline from 2014 to 2019. In other words, they can't bring new charges on either taxes or gun issues outside of that timeline. This is the scope of that agreement. But we still need some greater clarity, and this is still an ongoing proceeding, we should emphasize, about what it potentially means about the ongoing investigation. Remember, the letter from the U.S. Attorney when this plea agreement was announced a month ago indicated, yes, that there was an ongoing investigation. We were getting indications from Hunter Biden's side that there was potentially a reason that language was included, but that it didn't necessarily mean the same thing that we were interpreting it as, that this was indeed winding to a conclusion. And so that's the point of biggest clarity that we need at this point, Andrea. And I also just want to make another clarification, importantly, about Hunter Biden and his legal team and who's representing him in what capacity. Christopher Clark is the attorney who's been representing him and engaging in these negotiations with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Delaware as it relates to these charges. I mentioned Abby Lowell, who arrived here earlier, who is in the courtroom today, but he is playing a broader role in coordinating counsel in basically what you could consider what comes next in terms of Republican investigations on Capitol Hill. So just wanted to make sure we clarified who is doing what in terms of the president's son's legal team at the moment, Andrea.
And Paul Charlton, if you could give us your legal read on this. What we're hearing is that there would be no plea deal so far, and potentially a more limited one, which would have a scope of from 2014 to 2019 on taxes and drug use and firearms, and the government would not be bringing additional charges on those subjects.
It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment, Andrea, that this discussion, exactly what the agreement means and what the parameters of the agreement will be, it's an embarrassment that that didn't take place months ago. that everyone who walked into that courtroom didn't understand all of the terms, and especially a term as fundamental as this one. Am I resolving the whole of this investigation, or is it only a small piece of this investigation? It looks as if, and it sounds as if from the reporting that you're getting now, that the defense attorneys have come back around and said, we will agree on behalf of Hunter Biden to a limited scope of this plea, that it will reflect a few years within the tax violations, it will reflect the gun charge, but we and Hunter Biden understand that there is an ongoing investigation and that other charges may be coming forward. But how it is you get into federal court on a high-profile case like this and an important issue like this and don't have that clarity and don't have that understanding when you walk into courtroom is still beyond understanding. That doesn't make sense, and it ought not to have been proceeding in this way. We'll see if at the end of the day, the judge is satisfied that all the parties, the government, and very importantly, Hunter Biden, understand the exact terms of this plea.
And Catherine, Christian, let me bring you into this conversation because this has been an extraordinary day as this situation evolves. What is your impression based on what we know so far from court?
I'll add, it's shocking, not just an embarrassment, it's shocking. It's clear that the Biden attorneys and the prosecutors were on a completely different page. And these are discussions that you have before you step in a courtroom on a high-profile case with the press, that they did not work this out before, is sloppy on both sides. And I'll put it, I'm a former prosecutor, I'll put it really a lot of this on the prosecution. There is no reason why this shouldn't be worked out. And also, quite frankly, I don't know how defense attorneys would allow their client to plead guilty with a black cloud still over his head. It was always curious to me when the plea deal was announced that Mr. Biden's attorneys were saying that the investigation is over, and the U.S. Attorney's office was saying, no, it's not. And I figured, well, maybe that's semantics, but they'll be all worked out by the time they get into the courtroom. And clearly it wasn't worked out. So it's shocking to me that this happened. But I don't understand how he will plead guilty. He clearly, obviously, is going to plead guilty, and the judges did her job because she put it out on the record and wanted to make sure that he understands what was going on, that it was knowing, voluntarily intelligent. But if there's still this black cloud